When you think money can buy safety, think again. Some of the wealthiest people have met their end in hilariously ironic ways, tripping over luxury, choking on gourmet meals, or dying from their own over-the-top gadgets. It's a grim reminder. No amount of cash can outsmart fate's twisted sense of humor. A life most people only ever see in movies. A sprawling mansion in one of London's richest neighborhoods, family wealth measured in billions, private cars, staff on call, and the kind of resources where every problem should, in theory, have a solution. That was the world of Hans Christian Rausing, heir to the Tetra Pak fortune. A man born into extraordinary privilege. From the outside, it looked like the safest life imaginable. Money for the best doctors, the best rehab centers, private therapists, security, comfort, literally anything help could buy. And yet, despite all that protection, his story ended in one of the most tragic and painfully ironic ways possible. A death that wasn't dramatic or mysterious or violent, but quietly senseless and preventable. Hans and his wife Ava weren't strangers to high society. They were known for charity work, fundraising events, and rubbing shoulders with elites. But behind closed doors, both of them were fighting a much uglier battle: severe drug addiction. Not casual partying or occasional excess, but deep, long-term dependence on heroin, crack cocaine, and prescription drugs. Over the years, they went in and out of rehab, relapsed repeatedly, and slowly became more isolated. It's almost surreal to think about two billionaires living in a palace-like home, yet trapped by the same demons that ruin lives in far less forgiving circumstances. Addiction doesn't care about bank accounts, and their wealth couldn't shield them from it. Then came 2012. Eva overdosed inside their own home. No violence, no crime scene chaos, just a tragic, lonely overdose in a luxury bedroom. And here's where the story turns from heartbreaking to disturbingly strange. Instead of calling for help, instead of contacting doctors or authorities, Hans panicked and shut down. Whether it was denial, shock, or the fog of addiction, he simply couldn't face reality. So, he did nothing. He stayed in the house. He slept in another room. He wrapped her body and tried to mask the smell. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Inside a multi-million-pound mansion, with every resource imaginable at his fingertips, he lived alongside his wife's decomposing body. It sounds unreal, almost like something from a dark psychological thriller, but it was painfully real. Eventually, police only discovered Eva because Hans was stopped for erratic driving and arrested for drug possession. When officers went to the house to inform her, they made the grim discovery upstairs. She had been dead for around 2 months. 2 whole months. In a house big enough to host galas. It's hard not to feel the heavy irony of it all. A man who could afford the best medical care in the world, yet couldn't make the simplest, most crucial call for help. In the end, it wasn't lack of money or access that failed them. It was addiction, denial, and emotional collapse. He wasn't charged with causing her death, since it was an overdose, but he was convicted for preventing lawful burial and drug offenses. The judge called it one of the most tragic cases to come before the court, and that description fits, because this wasn't some grand scandal or calculated crime. It was smaller, sadder, and somehow worse, a slow, lonely unraveling. The kind of ending that feels bitterly ironic and almost stupid in its preventability. When you have everything and still lose in the most basic way, it hits differently. In the end, the Rausing story is less about wealth and more about a harsh truth. Money can buy comfort, influence, and luxury, but it can't buy stability, clarity, or freedom from addiction. And sometimes, even billionaires fall to the simplest, most tragically avoidable mistakes of all. Adolf Merkel's story reads less like a typical billionaire tragedy and more like one of those strange, almost unbelievable cautionary tales where success, pressure, and fear collide in the worst possible way. Here was a man who had basically won capitalism. We're talking serious, old-school industrial wealth, pharmaceuticals, cement, manufacturing, kind of businesses that quietly make billions while everyone else is busy chasing tech startups. Merkel was a German business titan, owner of companies like Ratiopharm and Heidelberg Cement, and for decades he had the reputation of being careful, conservative and disciplined, known for building an empire brick by brick. For decades, everything he touched seemed to grow. By the mid-2000s, he was one of the richest men in Germany, sitting on a fortune most people could not spend in 10 lifetimes. Then came 2008, the year the global financial system basically tripped over its own shoelaces. Markets crashed, banks panicked, and even seasoned investors started making desperate moves. Merkel made one big risky bet. He short-sold Volkswagen shares, expecting the price to fall. Instead, in a twist straight out of a finance thriller, the stock price exploded upward in one of the most famous short squeezes in history. Hedge funds were wrecked, traders were scrambling, and Merkel reportedly lost hundreds of millions, possibly over €1 billion, almost overnight. Objectively, it was a huge loss. But here's the part that makes the story so painfully ironic. Even after all that damage, he was still extremely wealthy. Not struggling businessman wealthy, not barely holding on wealthy, still billionaire wealthy. His companies still had value. Banks were negotiating. His empire was not gone. Yet psychologically the blow hit harder than the math. Years of control, reputation and certainty suddenly felt fragile. Debt piled up, newspapers speculated, and the once untouchable industrial kingpin probably felt like everything was slipping through his fingers. For someone used to always winning, even a partial loss can feel like total collapse. On January 5, 2009, he left home saying he was going for a walk, and instead stepped in front of a train near his hometown in Germany. Just like that, one of Europe's richest men was gone. No dramatic boardroom showdown, no courtroom battle, no slow financial ruin, just a single, irreversible moment driven by fear. That is what makes the whole incident so tragic and strangely ironic at the same time. He did not die because he had nothing left. He died because he believed he was losing everything, even when he still had more than most people could ever dream of. From the outside, it feels almost incomprehensible, even foolish. How could someone so wealthy see no way out? But from the inside, financial panic can warp reality, turning setbacks into disasters and embarrassment into catastrophe. His family later said he was broken by the crisis, which says a lot about how mental strain does not care about your bank balance. In the end, Adolf Merkel's death was not really about money at all. It was about perception, pride, and pressure. It is a sobering reminder that billions cannot buy peace of mind, that markets can mess with even the smartest investors, and that sometimes the greatest danger is not bankruptcy, but the fear of it. His life shows that wealth does not inoculate anyone from the human fragility of fear, anxiety, and desperation. Even a man who had built an empire, who had weathered decades of financial challenges, could be undone in a moment by panic and perception. The tragedy lies in the irony that Merkel, who had everything most people could imagine, lost his life over something that was largely reversible, over something that mathematically was not catastrophic, over something that in hindsight seems like an almost absurd overreaction. Yet, it is precisely that human element that makes the story unforgettable, a cautionary tale about the limits of money, the illusions of control, and the immense power of the mind over reality. Marvin Gaye was more than just a music legend. He was the smooth voice of soul, the guy who could make millions swoon with songs like Sexual Healing and Let's Get It On. But behind the fame, Grammy nods, and studio magic, Marvin had a family life that was, well, complicated. His father, Marvin Gaye Sr., was strict, controlling, and often abusive, turning the Gaye household into a pressure cooker of tension and unresolved anger. Fast forward to 1984, and life delivered a tragic plot twist that could only be described as absurdly ironic. Marvin had bought his father a gun for protection, probably thinking, hey, this will keep him safe. And yet, in the most tragically stupid twist of fate, that same gun ended up being the weapon that killed him during a heated family argument. Talk about cosmic irony with a side of dark humor. The shooting happened in their Los Angeles home, and it wasn't some dramatic Hollywood-style showdown. It was just a painfully messy domestic spat that spiraled out of control. Marvin Sr., wielding the very firearm his son had gifted him, shot Marvin in the chest. He was only 44 years old, meaning he had survived decades of fame. the grueling music industry, and personal struggles, only to be felled by the one person he tried to protect, and with the very object meant to provide that protection. It's almost cartoonishly absurd, like trying to save someone with a ladder and somehow getting crushed by it yourself. The story became a worldwide shock, leaving fans mourning, journalists sensationalizing, and pop culture collectively shaking its head at the ridiculousness of it all. Adding insult to injury, Marvin Sr. didn't serve a long prison sentence. He pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and received a 6-year suspended sentence with 5 years probation. So, not only was the death ironic and senseless, but justice came wrapped in a shrug. Marvin Gaye's life and death are a perfect blend of brilliance, heartbreak, and absurdity. A man who serenaded the world into love was taken out by the very gift meant to protect his own father. It's tragic, it's ironic, and yes, it's stupid, but it also cements his story in the history of the most bizarrely ironic deaths ever recorded. King Adolf Fredrik of Sweden, who reigned from 1751 until 1771, is remembered today not for military victories, political reforms, or statesmanship, but for an ironically foolish and tragic way to meet his end. Despite holding the power and prestige of a monarch, Adolf Fredrik died after consuming what is described in popular legend as a colossal and extravagant feast, culminating in an overwhelming indulgence in his favorite dessert, the semla, a cardamom bun filled with almond paste, traditionally eaten in warm milk. On 12th of February 1771, the king reportedly began his final meal with a variety of rich foods, including lobster, caviar, smoked herring, sauerkraut, meat, and champagne, and then proceeded to consume 14 servings of semla. While the exact details may have been exaggerated over time, the story has persisted as an example of how indulgence, excess, and lack of moderation can have real consequences. The tragic irony lies in the fact that Adolf Fredrik, a man who wielded immense wealth, power, and influence over a nation, met his end not on a battlefield or from political intrigue, but at a banquet, defeated by his own appetite. His death, while sudden, likely involved underlying health issues, including cardiovascular vulnerability, combined with the strain of such an extraordinarily heavy meal, though popular retellings simplify it to he ate himself to death. This simplification has made his death famous as both a cautionary tale and a curious historical anecdote. There is a stark reminder in this story that even those with the greatest advantages are not immune to the consequences of overindulgence, and that human frailty can undermine status and privilege. Beyond the immediate circumstances of the meal, the story of Adolf Frederik's death also reflects the cultural and social practices of the time. In 18th century Sweden, lavish feasts were a key aspect of royal life, signifying wealth, sophistication, and the ability to command resources on an almost unimaginable scale. Indulgence in rich foods, especially desserts like semla, was both a tradition and a status symbol, highlighting the monarch's place at the pinnacle of society. Yet, the very indulgence meant to celebrate life and wealth became the instrument of his demise, an almost literary example of hubris in a real historical context. Modern readers and historians often view the story with a mixture of fascination and incredulity, recognizing both the humor and the underlying tragedy. The king's death serves as a memorable intersection of human weakness, cultural practice, and historical storytelling, a moment when myth and reality converge. While it may be tempting to reduce Adolf Frederik's death to a punchline, it also offers insight into the vulnerabilities of human beings, regardless of power or social standing. The king's story has persisted precisely because of the ironic combination of grandeur, indulgence, and misfortune. A wealthy and powerful monarch, undone by something as ordinary and relatable as overeating, leaves a lasting impression on history. In the end, King Adolf Frederik's death is a cautionary tale and a peculiar footnote in history, illustrating the dangers of excess, the limits of human physiology, and the strange ways in which life and death sometimes intersect. He did not die on a battlefield, in a coup, or as a result of some elaborate intrigue. He died at a feast, in a moment that seems both absurd and sadly inevitable. The legacy of this event endures as a mixture of historical fact and legendary exaggeration, reminding us that even those who seem untouchable are subject to the same frailties as anyone else, and sometimes the simplest indulgences can have the most profound consequences. Tennessee Williams, one of America's greatest playwrights, lived a life filled with drama, passion, and brilliance, only to exit the stage in a way so mundane it is almost absurd. Born Thomas Lehner Williams III in 1911, he rose from a turbulent childhood in Mississippi to become a Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright, whose works like A Streetcar Named Desire, The Glass Menagerie, and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof would forever shape American theater. His plays were emotional masterclasses, exploring loneliness, desire, and human fragility, often drawing on his own personal struggles. Despite his towering literary stature, Williams's final moments were far from poetic. On February 25, 1983, at the age of 71, he was found dead in his suite at New York City's Hotel Élysée, apparently having choked on a plastic cap from a medicine bottle. For someone whose life had been steeped in the intensity of human emotion and tragedy, to die over something as trivial and seemingly stupid as a tiny bottle cap is darkly ironic, a kind of cruel, cosmic joke. The imagery is almost cartoonish. One of the most celebrated minds of the 20th century felled not by illness, old age, or a dramatic incident, but by a small piece of plastic lodged in his throat. It is the sort of death that makes you laugh nervously, while also shivering at its absurdity. Initial reports emphasized the bottle cap, framing it as an accidental choking incident. The image stuck: Tennessee Williams, genius of human despair, tragically undone by a nasal spray cap. But, as with many sensational stories, the reality was more nuanced. Later, autopsy reports suggested that Williams had been using the cap to assist in taking Seconal, a barbiturate, and that his death was more accurately linked to an overdose. Alcohol and prescription drugs likely dulled his reflexes, making what might have been a minor incident fatal. In this light, the death is still ironic, but it also becomes a sober reflection on the vulnerabilities of human frailty and the often overlooked dangers of substance use. Even in death, Williams's life of contradictions remained on display. A man who wrote with extraordinary insight into the pain and desire of others, whose own demise was private, sudden, and strangely trivial. There is a peculiar poetry to it, the brilliant playwright, accustomed to exploring the depth of tragedy on stage, meeting his end in a scenario so ordinary it feels almost surreal. Yet, beyond the irony lies a subtle lesson. Genius does not grant immunity from life's small, unexpected hazards. The world had seen Williams confront public failures, personal heartbreaks, and societal pressures, yet in the end, it was an everyday object, a tiny plastic bottle cap, that claimed him. This juxtaposition of monumental talent and humbling vulnerability is what makes the story linger in cultural memory. While one can chuckle at the absurdity of such an end, it also serves as a reflective moment on human mortality. Death, even for the great and famous, can be as arbitrary as it is inevitable. The narrative of Tennessee Williams' death has become more than a quirky anecdote. It is a testament to the unpredictability of life, a reminder that even those who shape the emotional lives of millions are not immune to life's small ironies. In a way, it mirrors the themes he explored in his work: the collision of human desire, fragility, and the sometimes comic cruelty of existence. Williams's legacy, of course, is not defined by the peculiarity of his death but by the enduring power of his writing. Yet the story of the bottle cap remains a strangely fitting epilogue, ironic, sobering, and almost absurd, for a man who spent his life illuminating the depths of human experience, only to leave the world in a way both tragically human and darkly humorous. Even in death, Tennessee Williams teaches something. Brilliance and vulnerability coexist, and sometimes life has a sense of humor that no one, however gifted, can escape. The details of his passing continue to fascinate, partly because they are so bizarre, partly because they underscore the precariousness of human life. A man who could capture the most intimate nuances of heartbreak and longing on stage could not escape a cruelly trivial end. There is irony in that, but also a certain poignancy, a reminder that genius does not exempt anyone from the ordinary hazards of existence. His death invites reflection, not just on the fragility of life, but on the unpredictable twists that even the most accomplished lives can encounter. The fact that a bottle cap, something so insignificant in the grand scale of things, played a role in the demise of a literary giant, highlights the randomness of fate. It is an ending that is both ridiculous and melancholic, darkly humorous, yet sobering. Tennessee Williams' works will outlive him, standing as testament to his insight, empathy, and genius. But the story of his final moments will always linger as a strange and ironic coda to an extraordinary life. It reminds us that no matter how much we achieve, life's absurdities can intervene in ways we could never anticipate, leaving a narrative that is both tragic and strangely humorous, echoing the complex interplay of brilliance and vulnerability that Williams explored in every play.